Direct from 7 News headquarters, the latest on the coronavirus outbreak with Michael Usher and Melissa Doyle.
Good evening and welcome. We have a better understanding of the numbers tonight and how coronavirus is spreading in your state.
The reason behind the rapidly rising death rates, those cruise ships are not helping, but there's also a lot of encouraging information about new testing kits.
In just a moment, a leading doctor will give us the ins and outs about those breakthroughs. Inside the war room, the government's medical team joins us on the infection surge. Australian sisters diagnosed with COVID-19 share their stories. They contracted it overseas. The antiviral medication set to shield medical staff. Could it protect the rest of us? Out of work and unsure, the Centrelink boss, he's live here tonight. Coronavirus and credit card debts, will banks bail you out or pause your repayments? But first, Mel, talk us through the rising infection rates.
Well, Michael, sadly, in the last 24 hours, we have seen a significant jump in deaths. 13 people have now lost their lives. The latest victims, 3 Victorian men aged in their 70s and a 68-year-old Toowoomba man. And tonight, a man from Western Australia. So around Australia, the number of cases now stands at 2,801. Breaking that down, if we look into Queensland, 493 people confirmed to have it. In New South Wales, cases now 1,219. The rate of growth a little slower than we've seen there in the previous days. In the ACT, 53. Victoria, 520, up 54 today. In Tasmania, 42. And in South Australia, the number of cases jumping by 39. 19 of those are from the Ruby Princess cruise ship. In the Northern Territory, there are 8 confirmed cases, and in Western Australia, 231 people.
Now, let's go first to this major breakthrough in the detection of a virus. This is important. 2 new types of rapid testing kits will be rolled out in Australia in the coming weeks, providing results in just 15 minutes. And they only require, as you can see there, a single drop of blood or a nasal swab. To discuss this big development, we're joined by infectious diseases physician Sanjaya Senanayake. Sanjaya, thanks for joining us again. Now, talk us through how these tests work. This is important.
Hi, Michael. Hi, Mel. So, whenever we have an infection with a virus, our body develops proteins that will fight the virus in the future. These proteins are called antibodies. There's one that appears early, within about a week, and another that appears a bit later and lasts for life. We have a test, which is a bit like a pregnancy test, in that instead of providing urine, you provide a drop of blood or a small amount of blood, and you look at the pattern of lines and you can tell which antibodies, if any, have been produced. So, and that can happen within 10 to 15 minutes. That's fantastic. We already have a great test, which is the nasopharyngeal swab, which detects a small amount of genetic material from the virus, but that takes 5 to 6 hours to process. The new test coming up takes 45 minutes.
All right, so a new test in either 15 or 45 minutes, how would that change the game for Australians impacted by the virus?
Well, look, the mantra from the World Health Organization and everywhere is test, test, test. And as I said, we have a great test at the moment, but it takes 5 to 6 hours to process. And if you've got hundreds and hundreds of tests to process, that means it can take a few days for someone to get a result. This will shorten that process. Also, being able to test for antibodies, particularly the one that lasts long term, will be able to answer the question about how many people really get infected but don't have symptoms. So it'll be very helpful to understand the epidemiology of COVID-19.
All right, well, that's some good news that we need. Dr. Sanjaya Senanayake, thank you.
And for more on these new testing kits and the rising death rate in Australia, earlier I spoke with the government's Deputy Chief Medical Officer, Professor Michael Kidd. Professor Kidd, these rapid testing kits we're talking about, how soon could they be in use?
The Australian government has ordered 1.5 million rapid test kits, and they'll be coming into the country. We hope they'll be arriving very soon and distributed for use by doctors and nurses and other healthcare providers across Australia in all clinical settings. On the internet, COVID-19 tests are starting to appear, trying to get people to pay for them. Please do not waste your money buying one of these. They're not approved for use in Australia. If they're being brought in from outside Australia, they'll be stopped by border control. We don't know whether they're actually measuring for COVID-19 or something else. Don't waste your money. If you're worried, put in place the measures that we've talked about: hand washing, distancing, staying at home, working with your trusted general practitioner.
There's been 4 deaths in the last 24 hours. That's the biggest number in that time period. Should we be alarmed?
I think what this is showing us, and these 4 deaths, each death, of course, is a terrible tragedy. These 4 deaths have occurred in elderly people in places right across Australia, and it re-emphasises us the importance of the measures which have been put in place by the Australian government, by the state and territory governments, in order to protect all of us, but especially to protect the most vulnerable members of our society, our elder members, our friends and our relations who have chronic diseases, conditions which may put them at risk if they get infected with the coronavirus, people who are immunocompromised. We have to all do our part, Mel, and if we are diagnosed with COVID-19, or if we are told that it's suspected that we have COVID-19 and we are told to stay at home in quarantine, that's what we do. We go straight home, we stay in quarantine, and we make sure that we're not risking spreading this virus to other people. We've all got to do our part, Mel. This is something which is on everybody in Australia in order to stop the spread of this virus.
You had a nationwide video hookup with 14,000 GPs today. These are the men and women at the coalface. What are their major concerns at this point in time?
People are very concerned about the lack of personal protective equipment, the PPE, the masks and so forth. The government is working very hard to get more and more masks available and distributed to general practices, to aged care facilities, to disability care providers and to home care providers, as well as to hospitals right across the country. We have millions of masks on order and coming in every day, so hopefully we'll be able to address that concern. People are very concerned about the restrictions on testing because of the limitations and the number of test kits we have available. As we've discussed, Mel, with the new rapid testing kits coming in, that capacity will increase and will increase very quickly. But what I am really heartened about is the responses from my colleagues working in healthcare right across Australia. People are working incredibly hard. People are very dedicated to supporting their patients, the members of their local communities.
Thanks so much for that update. We do appreciate your time, Professor Kidd.
Thanks, Mel.
And of course, since that interview, there has been another death in WA. 70-year-old man, the latest victim, making it 5 deaths in a 24-hour period.
Well, look, let's go to that cruise ship issue now. A third cruise ship is about to enter the tense standoff on the WA coast. Let's bring in our reporter, Rob Scott, who's on the water for us tonight. Rob, hello to you. You're sitting off that ship there behind you. That's the Tania. It is the centre of this diplomatic dilemma. So what is happening with those people on board?
Yeah, exactly, Michael. It is at the centre of this standoff, as you say. The Tania behind me here, it's been here for at least a day or so. There are now officially 7 confirmed cases of coronavirus on board after 10 people were tested overnight. 3 of them came back negative. 3 of those 10 tests came back negative, but there are concerns for 2 of those because they are still showing symptoms, so there's every chance that they are infected as well. The WA Premier has made it abundantly clear, infected or not, no one is getting off this ship into Perth unless it is a life-threatening emergency. And even then, he says they should be sent far away from our hospitals to the nearest Defence Force base. He doesn't want them mingling with any of the West Australian public. And he says once they get to that Defence Force base, likely Garden Island out here in Gage Roads, then it's up to the Commonwealth to make sure that they get home. He says as soon as the ship has refuelled, he wants it to be on its way, carrying on to South Africa, again reiterating that it is the Commonwealth's responsibility to make sure that that happens. As for the passengers on board, despite the growing number of infections, they don't really appear to be self-isolating in their cabins. They are walking freely out on the decks, most of them not wearing masks at all.
All right, Rob, so the Vasco da Gama, another ship, it has 800 Australians on board, but it won't be allowed to dock just yet either.
No, that's right, Michael. 800 Australians About 200 of those are West Australians, and when that gets here on Monday, those West Australians will be sent straight to Rottnest Island, not far from where I am now, a playground for West Australians, really. The island has been cleared. All those West Australians will be sent there for 2 weeks of isolation. Our Premier says he does not want a repeat of what happened in Sydney with the Ruby Princess here in Western Australia. So all these cruise ships are causing a major headache for him and his government today.
It is an absolute mess. All right, Rob Scott off the coast of WA there. Thank you.
And it's all part of a broader cruise ship crisis, with more than 3,000 Australians stranded on vessels scattered all over the world. Well, senior reporter Denham Hitchcock has been taking a look at this today. And Denham, this really is a major concern.
Well, it is, Mel, and for multiple reasons. So first, let's take a look at this map to get an idea of just where they all are. So these are the 6 cruise ships that I was able to find today. Their names are right there. They're in their right locations. The numbers you see there are the number of Australians that are on board. Now, these 2 down here, they're the ones that Rob was talking about, and Australia does not want to let them in. So I did ask details from DFAT for the others because there's 30 ships out there. This only shows 6, but I'm still waiting on that information. But it leaves about 24 other massive cruise liners out there somewhere. The problem is no one wants those passengers to dock in their port. Australia's even trying to turn away those 2 cruise ships off Fremantle. Recycled air in the close confines of a ship has proven to be the perfect breeding ground for COVID-19. Passengers are understandably nervous. Australian Siobhan and Fiona sent this message from the ocean Atlantic off Uruguay.
In this time, some Americans, Canadians, Israelis and British have left the ship. Not a single Australian has had the opportunity to leave.
We are extremely frustrated that all the ministers, embassies and consulates keep telling us that they are aware of our situation, but no one is stepping up to help us.
Please, Scott Morrison, get us home.
Some desperate pleas there. And this is what the authorities are desperate to avoid: the complete and utter disastrous handling of the cruise ship Ruby Princess. The ship's logs reveal 158 passengers were sick when it came into Sydney, many with high fevers. But when it docked a few weeks ago, all passengers were allowed to disembark, dispersing into the Australian public and even overseas. 133 passengers were later found to have COVID-19, and they turned out, Mel, to be a virus time bomb.
Absolutely, didn't we learn that one, Denham? Thank you. And more than 200 cruise ship passengers who chartered a flight home from Hawaii are on corona lockdown tonight at a 5-star Sydney hotel. Local residents are furious that they weren't told the passengers from the Norwegian Jewel were being held there. 5 of the passengers have COVID-19 symptoms and are undergoing testing. The others are in isolation. And tens of thousands more Australians have been stood down from their jobs today as the nation's unemployment crisis worsens. The Tasmanian Premier became emotional addressing the issue in Parliament today.
The forced sacking of tens of thousands of our fellow Tasmanians this week, at the stroke of my pen, broke my heart.
Now, Centrelink has certainly been struggling under the pressure. We've been reporting that, plagued by website crashes and call centre delays. Long lines also at branches. Let's get an update from Services Australia General Manager Hank Jongen, who joins us again. Hank, thanks for joining the latest. Look, many people are still complaining. We spoke to you about this the other night, that they still can't log on to the MyGov website today. On social media, your services said, look, we're still having intermittent problems. When's it going to be fixed?
Well, look, the first thing I have to say is that we released new functionality during the middle of the day yesterday, which means that people can log an intent to claim. All you have to do is go to MyGov and you will then see a button which registers your intent to claim. Right now, that's all you have to do. We will then contact you and step you through the claim process. So far, well over 300,000 have been able to use that capability. We have done everything we can to improve the capacity of our website to ensure that more and more simultaneous users can get through. Can I just say, there is no need to queue. There is no need to ring us.
Well, on that point
all
then, who should go
use
in?
MyGov.
Who should go in? Who should actually front up to an office?
Look, there are certainly people in emergency situations that we deal with on a day-to-day basis. And of course and that's why we want to free up the queues. We're talking about mums that find themselves, as a result of domestic violence, suddenly out of the home. They're the people that we really do want to see. If we need to see you, we'll let you know that we want to see you. But look, this MyGov button is a significant step forward for us. We've had people working around the clock to bring up that capability.
Let's take this next step forward, Hank, for people who are now going through it and getting the right paperwork. There's a new intent to claim function. People no longer need to show an employment separation certificate. Let's just talk a bit about that. What information do they need to provide?
Look, what the government has done is freed up all of the existing rules around job seeker payment. You no longer need a separation certificate. The waiting periods have all been waived, as have most of the mutual obligations that people on job seeker payment usually have to comply with. So the process has been streamlined. If you log on to MyGov and register your intent to claim, you simply now have to wait. We will contact you and take you through the next steps.
All right, when we spoke to you on Tuesday, you told us that Centrelink was hiring 5,000 new staff to cope with demand. How soon will they be working?
We're already recruiting. Look, we're redeploying staff across the organisation and training them. We're bringing on board our contracted suppliers, bringing on extra staff, and we are in the middle of recruitment as well.
All right, Hank, thanks.
Real pleasure. Thank you. Anytime.
Let's get the latest now from inside COVID HQ, and across to Parliament House political correspondent Tim Lester is with us tonight. Tim, first up, the government's considering a raft of extraordinary new measures. Can you run us through those?
Well, Mel, 7 News tonight has reported the possibility that they might move towards some form of business hibernation scheme. This would be allowing the worst affected businesses in this crisis not to pay tax for a period, perhaps not even to pay their rent or debt repayments, depending on how much agreement the government can get from other companies to participate in this, mothballing a company for months and then bringing it out when the economy improves and restarting. It's a big undertaking and not necessarily close, but favoured by some senior figures in the government. There's also talk of more spending on wage subsidies, and all of this will be informed by a virtual meeting tonight of the leaders of the world's 20 biggest economies, the G20, meeting remotely tonight, including Scott Morrison. This as 80 world countries now seek help from the IMF. It would be an extraordinary meeting to listen to.
Yeah, you'll let us know what happens in the morning. But the National Cabinet meets again tomorrow morning. What can you tell us that might come from that?
At 10 o'clock, Mel, another virtual meeting for the Prime Minister, so he's getting plenty of time at his virtual meeting room. Likely some of the discussion here will be around points at which the state premiers might want to move closer or even fully to lockdowns, perhaps not lockdowns of entire states, but of particular hotspots. There's talk about the Prime Minister himself, in fact, has foreshadowed the possibility that particular areas where the virus has been quite prominent might be shut down more severely. And Gladys Berejiklian, the New South Wales Premier today, when pushed on lockdown, said potentially, absolutely, that the New South Wales government is prepared to go further. So a lot of interest on how far National Cabinet goes on that front tomorrow.
All right, it's going to be a big night and a busy morning. Tim Lester, thank you.
Well, still to come, inside self-isolation, still some confusion around this. The official rules, we'll talk through them, what you need to know before you step out.
And why hairdressers are pleading to be shut down. Our medical experts tell you if they are safe.
Coronavirus and credit card debt. I know a lot of you have been asking about this. Will the banks bail you out or pause repayments? Those answers soon.
And how to handle those tricky questions from our little kids. A child psychologist gives us some useful advice. That is next on the latest from 7 News. With Australia's number of infections steadily rising and our death toll reaching 13 today, to take a closer look at our national figures, Denham is back to break it down for us.
Thanks, Mel. We see that national figure a lot, but this is how the states are tracking individually. So one by one, as they come across the screen, dates down the left, their number of cases on the side. New South Wales far out in front at 1,219 cases. That is our infection rate. But how do we stack up against the rest of the world? Well, this is Australia's curve. The dates are down the bottom, the number of cases on the left. Now, with 2,423 infections, we are rising fast, but we have a relatively low death toll. So where was Italy when they had the same number of infections? They hit that mark on March the 3rd. And their death toll was far higher than ours at 79, so that's encouraging for us. But here's the warning. That was at the start of their steep curve. Only 2 weeks later, their death toll was 2,503. An older population than ours, Michael, but an indication of the critical point that we are at.
All right, then, and now all passengers arriving at Sydney International Airport are now having their temperatures checked after concerns were raised about a lack of testing and confusion within the terminal. The change to screening procedures has been blamed for these scenes, which prompted a fair bit of outrage online. The video shows huge queues of travellers not adhering to social distancing rules. More the point, though, nobody enforcing them. So let's bring in our reporter Alex Hart, who recently returned from London. He was on assignment for us and he's now in self-isolation. Al, good evening to you. So how do those scenes compare to what your experience was arriving home on Monday?
Evening, Michael. They were dissimilar, actually. When I came in at about 6 a.m. on Monday morning, there were quite a number of flights, so hundreds of passengers, and those e-passport gates that we're used to using now weren't in operation, so everyone had to queue up to get cleared by a Border Force officer, and there was mass congestion in that queue. No one observing social distancing and certainly nobody enforcing it, and that, again, is what we saw today. The person who took that video within the Sydney International Arrivals Hall there said the Border Force officer told her that it wasn't their responsibility to enforce social distancing. That is up to biosecurity. And the union that represents those workers went further to say the problem was today is that New South Wales Health started checking the temperature of every incoming passenger. And when I came in a couple of days ago, all there was one person randomly checking passengers, and it was probably one in several hundred passengers at best. On top of that, the airport says today that it has brought in extra security guards to remind passengers of their social distancing obligations, Michael.
I think that vision we're looking at now is some of the vision that you shot as well. But look, I hate to say this, but you can't tell me that in a few days' time it's not going to be a similar situation to the cruise ships with so many people close together, unchecked, unpoliced as well. So anyway, look, see what happens there. Look, isolation and self-isolation, you're in it right now. The protocols, let's talk about them. Can you clarify exactly what they are?
Yeah, look, from my understanding, there hasn't been any change in the past couple of days. And I was given this paperwork when I arrived. It's 3 pages outlining what can and can't be done. Obviously, everyone coming in either by plane or by cruise ship has to spend 14 days in self-isolation. And you're not tested still unless you're showing symptoms or unless you've been in contact with somebody who is confirmed to have COVID-19. You cannot leave your home, your hotel, your Airbnb, like where I'm staying, unless you're seeking medical care. You can stay with your family in your home, but only if you've got a separate bathroom and bedroom. You wipe down any common spaces after they've been used, and also you don't have any contact with your family members. And your address now, that has to be registered with Border Force Police, now checking to make sure people are abiding by the rules, Michael.
All right, Alex Hart reporting from self-isolation. Thanks for that tonight.
Well, let's bring in our panel of experts now. Intensive care specialist, Dr. John Fraser, GP and biomedical engineering research scientist, Dr. Zach Turner. Gents, good evening. Zach, starting with you, we've just been talking to Alex Hart in isolation. A lot of people, though, are still going to work. So we clearly are. What happens if someone in the building falls ill? Like, does everyone then have to self-isolate, or only those that have been in close contact with them?
Look, at this stage, I mean, this is the difficulty with having such sort of contradictory information, is that everybody who does not need to be at work should be staying at home. Everybody that doesn't need to be essentially at your workplace should be at home. And this is because just the regular breathing that we do, and this is why we talk about social distancing being at least 1.5 to 2 metres. This is because just our normal breathing means that we're breathing in the micro particles from these viruses up to this distance. So the thing that we really want for people is to realise is that this is really serious. We need to stay at home. We need to avoid any kind of social interaction if we can. If you have to go to work, make sure that you're at least 2 metres away, because this will separate that breathing distance from you, because it doesn't even take into account coughing or sneezing, which can increase that up to 7 or 8 metres or more.
But Zach, just to clarify that point, if you're in a workplace where you're loading a truck, there's 4 or 5 of you, one of those guys go down, you've been in with 1.5 metres trying to keep distance. If one of them falls ill, what happens to you?
Well, if you are otherwise well, I would say that your social distancing should remain exactly the same. If you start, though, to feel any kind of cough, cold, fever symptoms, you need to start self-isolating as well. If a person does fall ill and they've been around you in the past couple of days, this is exactly the time where you need to probably put up your hand and go, guys, I need to take time off. I need to go and self-isolate for at least a few days, up to 7, to make sure that you aren't further compromising your colleagues. Because this is the biggest part of this, is that we want to prevent the spread of this and prevent this from harming the people that are most vulnerable in our communities.
Of course.
And that means that all of us, even if we are feeling well, might need to take some time off and go home and have a break and do some work from home.
John, let's bring you in as we go to air tonight. COVID-19 has claimed 13 Australian lives. Are the deaths primarily people who are immunocompromised or elderly, or are otherwise healthy people dying too?
So as you noted, we don't have very many deaths. What we have got is tragic in Australia just now, but I can tell you from our international colleagues we're working with, we are seeing younger people. We're seeing 40-year-olds that are marathon runners. In the New York today, I think it was, there's an 18-year-old, 8-year-old chap who's fit and well. At the moment, the majority are unwell with cardiac disease, diabetes or immunocompromised, but that doesn't mean everyone is safe if they are young and fit. This is a disease that can hit us all.
John, the number we don't get, though, is those that are in ICU. Can you give us an idea of how that's tracking?
Again, Australia's not really in this storm yet. There are a number of people in intensive care. We've got fantastic intensive care across Australia and New Zealand, and the ANZIC Society's doing a great job of preparing, and we're doing it federally. So the ICUs are not under strain yet. It will come. Looking at our colleagues from Italy and across Europe, and indeed New York at the moment is 80% full, all their ICU beds. James Cook University today has said that by mid-April their modelers, if it continues in that slope you've shown, would be filled by mid-April. So our job is to try and keep people stay safe, self-isolate, and try and help us help you by keeping the beds as free as possible for those that need it.
Zach, the 30-minute restriction on hair appointments has now been lifted. There was a bit of a flipping on that. But even the hairdressers today, they're concerned. Here's what the CEO of Just Cuts had to say.
Does this make sense? I'm touching this client's hair, and our stylists are doing this every day. We need the government now to shut us down.
Well, they kind of did in the first place, but it changed. From a doctor's perspective, is it safe to go to the salon at the moment, Zach?
No, it's not. Not at all. And this is why this is so convoluted and contradictory, that we have been told that hairdressers are fine but beauticians and other people aren't. This is completely incorrect advice that we're getting here. Do not go to a hairdresser. These people, whilst they're practicing the very best that they can in regards to hygiene, you're still spreading, you're still within 1.5 metres of each other. And more than that, hairdryers can actually spread the microflora of this virus several metres further. So you're in an area that could be spreading the virus far further than even in a normal environment. So this is absolutely insane, and 30 minutes or longer.
Yeah, all right,
Crazy.
well, we'll skip it. John, just to finish up, can I ask you, you are leading the world's only data pool for clinicians on the front line of COVID-19. How can people at home help?
Look, what we can get is gathered data. There's maybe 15 or 30,000 people out there. This is a different condition. My colleague Gianluigi is downstairs just now analysing the data as we speak, and this looks like a different lung condition. We've got our colleagues across the world, 39 countries have joined us, giving us their data so that we can help them. So covidcritical.org, we need 1 million just now, but we have got some amazing people. IBM's come to the party. We've got lawyers working for nothing for us. Who would have ever thought? But please, the things you could do is help us with covidcritical.org. but also stay safe, self-isolate and support ECMO cards.
Absolutely, good messages. John Fraser, Zach Turner, thank you, gents.
Well, still to come. Advice if you're struggling to pay your credit card bills. It's your essential guide. That's soon.
There's a repurposed medication about to be trialled on medical staff. If it works, could it protect us all?
And how to talk to our little kids about what's happening in the world without scaring them. An expert gives us some good guidelines there. That's all next here on The Latest from 7 News. Back in a minute. Well, debt is a mounting concern for people who've lost income due to the coronavirus. Australians owe more than, it's a staggering figure, $29 billion on credit cards alone. So let's bring in Consumer Action Law Centre CEO Gerard Brody. Gerard, thanks so much for joining The Latest. Let me ask you, what are the providers doing for people struggling to pay their credit card bills right now, especially if you lost your job?
I don't think banks and credit card providers are doing enough to support their customers. They will offer flexibility if you get in touch, but we know there are hundreds of thousands, if not millions of people that are falling into financial difficulty right now. And so banks need to be more proactive, including waiving interest charges that they want to apply.
Yeah, they don't normally like giving a lot of leeway on the credit cards at all, but what's your advice to people in this situation? Because there'll be many of them.
Yeah, I think it's really difficult at the moment to get in touch with your banks as well. We know that the call centres are struggling, the telecommunication system itself is struggling. I would say to people, don't give up, get in touch with your bank. They can offer assistance if you get through, but the banks themselves also need to be proactive and automatically assist people where they can.
Yeah, hopefully there's triggers in there for financial stress somewhere, so they might be able to activate that for a short period. But you're right, get hold of the banks. Now, concerns that more people in a really tight spot will take out one of those payday loans to make ends meet, very short borrowing, but really tight conditions. How cautious should people be about those?
Well, payday loans cause misery. They actually do not help people through a tight spot. The repayments are high, the interest and fee charges can be equivalent of up to 400% per annum, which is just eye-watering. I'd like to see payday lenders actually close down during this pandemic. They're only going to cause more financial hardship.
OK, that's a good point. We should raise that with the government as well. Consumer Law Action Centre CEO Gerard Brody, thank you. Still to come, the medication being trialled that could protect our frontline health workers and in turn all of us.
And we focus on childcare centres, how they're coping and how the experts suggest we answer those tricky kids' questions.
That is next here on The Latest from 7 News. A repurposed drug will soon be tested on healthy Australian doctors and nurses. It's being called the Shield, and it's hoped it will safeguard them against the coronavirus. Professor Mark Pellegrini is leading the trial at the Walter and Eliza Hall Institute in Melbourne, and he told us about this vital work. Well, Professor, thank you for joining us. I'd like to ask you first, tell us about the trials and what exactly is it that you're testing?
Yes, this is a drug called hydroxychloroquine, which there's accumulating data to suggest that this drug can prevent the coronavirus from replicating in tissue cells. And so we want to take this drug and give it to frontline healthcare workers to see if we can prevent them from getting COVID-19. We think the best chances of having this drug successfully work is to give it to healthcare workers before they come or before they're exposed to the virus, so that it prevents them from getting COVID-19.
And how do you find that it would have sort of a preventative measure for COVID-19?
Yes, it's an interesting question, and it's really to do with the way the drug works on cells. It has an action where it stops the cell sort of trafficking proteins in the cell, and obviously viruses are completely reliant on cellular activity, and this particular drug interferes with that. So we think that it could well have capacity to stop the virus from replicating in cells.
Would there be any concern about depleting supplies for those that currently require that drug, to the point that GPs might not longer prescribe it, except in specific cases?
That's a very good question again, and our government has taken every effort to make sure that drug is restricted only to people who are already on this drug. And the drug that is required for this particular clinical trial has been sequestered separately from a company that is delivering it for the purposes of clinical trials.
Right. And obviously everyone's wondering keenly about a vaccine and the race to find that vaccine. But what would be the difference between using this drug as a treatment and a possible vaccine?
Yes, the two are both very, very important and completely complementary. So an antiviral drug like hydroxychloroquine, if it turns out to be useful, would actually be taken every day to try and prevent people from getting disease. So you have to always take it to prevent disease. Whereas a vaccine is given sort of like a one-shot wonder. You have an injection and it creates a degree of immunity in a person, so you only need the one shot and then you'll have immunity for a protracted period of time. Very different, both very important and both complementary.
So if you could roll it out, and obviously our health and medical workers are the ones on the front line, they need protecting first, but once they received it, if it were to work, could we then use it among the general population?
Yes, and I think the important point is that if it works, but yes, if it did work, probably the way to roll it out is to the highest risk group people first. So you could speculate that what you could do is if there's a mini outbreak in a nursing home or some high risk area, you could give it to the residents there to take it to prevent them from getting COVID-19. So it could be delivered to sort of strategic places and strategic scenarios to try and prevent disease from spreading.
Okay. Professor Mark Pellegrini, it's fascinating. Thank you.
My pleasure. Thanks you.
It certainly is. Now, still to come, how the crisis is impacting our early childcare industry and some helpful advice when our children ask, is everything going to be okay? It's next on the latest from 7 News. Well, as schools continue to urge parents to keep their children at home early, childcare centres are struggling with uncertainty. Melissa Scaife is director at Lilybells in Sydney. Melissa, premiers have been urging families to keep school kids at home, but have you had any directive?
Well, no. And I'll just correct you on one thing. I'm from Fit Kids Learning Centres. Yes, we haven't had any directive, just the suggestion that it is best to keep children at home.
So what has been the impact then on childcare centres?
It's been huge, Mel, huge in every area. Financially, of course, when our families have had to make that really difficult decision to keep children at home because of financial stress and pressure and fear, of course. But it's also had a massive emotional toll, and that's really concerning. It's for staff as well as families, as well as our youngest, our children.
Yeah, tell me about staff and how they're coping. Have there been many layoffs at this point? I would imagine a lot of them, want to stay at home.
Yeah, and we've been forced to step down some of our much loved carers that do a fantastic job, and that's been so terribly difficult. And they're conflicted. They want to be there to care for children. They want to be there to support families. That's what early childhood educators do, and do because they love it. And they want to be there for their own families. So they're really torn.
And what about parents? So, I mean, let's be honest, we all know that a spot in a childcare centre is as rare as a hen's tooth. So you don't want to lose your place, but parents are struggling financially now. How do they manage that juggle?
With great difficulty. They're torn because, families form such a bond and such a relationship with their early childhood service and the educators that care for their kids. Sometimes these children have been with us for many, many years. They stay with us for many years. They have siblings that come through, families that have been with us for years and years. And so making the decision, and in many cases being forced to make the decision to leave their service and run the risk of not having a place is very concerning and adding to the anxiety and stress that our families are dealing with.
Oh, it's across the board. Mel, thank you very much. All the best to all of your staff and to the kids. They're the ones that we're also thinking of. So thank you.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and as you know, kids usually get straight to the point with questions. So we've got a little snapshot of just some of the questions that they've been asking.
Can I still come? come to kindy? Are we going to want our food? All restaurants are being closed.
All restaurants are being closed.
Even McDonald's. What happens if they don't make ice cream anymore? Before the virus comes in, all the shops close. When can I see Poppy again?
That, I'm sure, is a question that lots and lots of kids right across the country are asking now. So Ellen Kulbicki is a child psychologist. Ellen, you work with kids under 6. What do we say to them when they ask when they can see Poppy again?
Yeah, it's definitely a tough one. I think we've got to be honest with our children. We need to use really age-appropriate, simple language when we're answering their questions, and try to, minimise any of those misconceptions that they might have as well. And when we're answering those really tricky questions, make sure we're giving them time and giving them a really safe space to be answering those questions in.
But what's your advice on, I guess, wording that you use? Because you want to be honest, but you don't want to scare them.
No, you definitely don't want to scare them. So I suppose it is really important to choose your language really wisely. Avoid emotionally laden language. Keep it simple. If a child's 4 years old, use language that's appropriate for a 4-year-old, but being as honest as you can.
What are you finding kids are talking about? What is frightening them the most at this moment?
I definitely think they're picking up on adults' worry and adults' stress. So I think when they're seeing us worry, they're worrying. When they're seeing things change, they're worrying as well. And when all their routines are being disrupted as well, children thrive on predictability and routine. And when things change, that worries them as well. And they're perceptive little people. You know, if we've got media news running in the background, or they're hearing other adults having adult conversations, they're picking up on what they're talking about, and that very sensationalised language, and that very emotional language. They're very frightened by that as well.
All right, we'll be very careful of the words that we use. Some great advice there, Ellen. Thank you.
Well, your Friday weather forecast. Where's the week gone? Friday already almost. It's next here on the latest from 7 News. Well, welcome back. We're taking a look now over the city of Madrid tonight. An empty Madrid. Spain's got it really bad. Let's have a look at the temps around our country now. Brisbane, a shower or two. The graphic's coming up in a minute. There it is. Sydney, showers as well. Melbourne, a top of 22. Adelaide, mostly sunny and 27. Perth, 29. Having a look at some other parts. Mackay, 29. Wagga Wagga, sunny. Stawell, 26 and partly cloudy. And Broome, looks like the place to be. 35 tomorrow. Right there.
Well, thank you for your company this evening. We will have more from 7 News at 9:30 tonight. I'm Melissa Doyle.
And I'm Michael Usher. Thanks for your company. Have a good night.